That night still plays in my mind like a movie I never asked to star in. The lights were bright, the music too loud, and all I wanted was to hand my son and his wife a small gift. Something simple, something from the heart. But before I could even speak, her hand struck my face. The sound silenced the entire room. Everyone froze, even my son. And when she leaned in, demanding the keys to my house, I realized the slap wasn't just on my cheek. It was on every sacrifice I'd ever made. That moment didn't just break something in me. It woke something up. If you believe that silence can still hold power, that dignity can fight back without shouting, then stay with me through this story. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of quiet strength. Like this video if you stand for justice, and share it so others remember. No one is ever too old to fight for their truth. Now let's go back to where it all began. The ballroom smelled like money and lilies. Soft jazz played over the chatter of people who all looked like they'd come straight out of glossy magazines. Everyone was there to celebrate Caleb and Vanessa's engagement, Charleston's golden couple. Everyone. Except the woman no one expected to see walk through those grand wooden doors. Naomi Sterling paused just inside the entrance, clutching a small wrapped box in both hands. Her fingers trembled, part nerves, part the arthritis that had been whispering through her bones for years. She'd spent half the afternoon deciding whether to come at all. But it was her son's night, and mothers show up, even when they're not wanted. Her dress was simple, soft blue, a little outdated, ironed twice that morning. Around her wrist hung a single charm bracelet, the one Caleb had made for her when he was 10, using a keychain from their old house. It jangled quietly as she took her first steps inside. People turned. Not in surprise, but in that slow scanning way that says you don't belong here. Naomi smiled anyway. The kind of smile you wear when you've practiced kindness so long it's become armor. Across the room, Vanessa saw her first. The younger woman's red lips froze mid-laugh. She whispered something to her friends, then glided across the marble floor like a storm disguised as silk. Well, Vanessa said, voice sweet but sharp, I didn't think you'd actually come. Naomi held out the gift. Just a little something for your new home, she said softly. Something blue. Vanessa eyed the tiny box like it might bite her. You didn't need to bring anything, she replied. Really? You've already given us the biggest gift. Naomi blinked. I have? Vanessa smiled wider, crueler. The house, Naomi. You still have that old keychain, don't you? Well, she leaned closer, her perfume cutting through the air. That house isn't yours anymore. For a second, Naomi didn't understand. The music swelled, glasses clinked. Then her son appeared beside his fiancée, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He couldn't look her in the eyes. Caleb, Naomi whispered. Vanessa lifted her champagne glass. We signed the papers this morning, she announced, voice bright enough for nearby guests to hear. It's ours now. Naomi's chest went cold. You what? She managed almost a whisper. You sold my house? Your house? Vanessa laughed softly, a sound that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, Naomi. You've been living there rent-free for years. Caleb thought it was time you let go. Retirement, independence, all that. The people around them shifted awkwardly. Someone turned down the music. Naomi's hand trembled. You can't just. Before she could finish, Vanessa's open palm cracked across her face. The sound sliced through the room like thunder. Every conversation died. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Naomi's cheek burned, her ears rang. A fork fell somewhere in the background. Caleb stood frozen, his mouth half open, not saying a word. Naomi stumbled back, hitting the edge of a table. Her gift box dropped to the floor, rolling beneath the chairs. Inside, the little embroidered napkins she'd sewn for the couple, each one with their initials, lay crumpled unseen. Vanessa's voice broke the silence. We're done pretending, Naomi, she said. You've been holding on to that old place like it means something. It's ours now. That's how life works. Naomi touched her cheek. blinking hard to hold back the tears. For a second she looked at her son, the same boy she'd stayed up nights for, the one who used to fall asleep on her lap while she graded music sheets. He looked right through her, past her like she was a stranger in a crowd. "Say something," she whispered. But Caleb said nothing. His jaw tightened, eyes fixed on the floor. Naomi bent down slowly, knees aching, and picked up the keychain that had fallen from her bracelet. The little brass key, dull and worn from decades of turning the same lock, caught the chandelier's light. In that reflection she saw every late night, every sacrifice, every piece of herself she traded to raise him. She turned the key in her hand. "If you think it's yours," she said quietly, almost to herself, "then you've never known what home means." Her words barely carried over the hum of shocked whispers. Someone muttered, "Is she okay?" Another said, "That poor woman." But Naomi didn't hear them. The ringing in her ears had turned to a steady pulse, calm, almost peaceful. A strange stillness settled in her chest. Vanessa gave a small shrug, taking Caleb's arm. "Come on, babe. Let's get back to our guests." They walked away, leaving Naomi standing alone under the chandelier's glow. The crowd parted around her like water, avoiding her eyes. The music started up again, forced and awkward. Naomi straightened her shoulders. Her fingers brushed the spot on her cheek that still stung, and she smiled, not out of happiness but defiance, the kind that says, "I've survived worse." She walked out through the side door into the cool Charleston night. The air smelled of rain and salt from the harbor. She stood there for a long moment, breathing, watching her breath rise like smoke in the dim light. Her phone buzzed in her purse. A text from Caleb. "Don't make this harder, Mom. We'll talk later." She stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then she slipped the phone back into her bag, along with the broken keychain. Down the street, the old church bell struck 9. Naomi started walking toward her car, the one her late husband had fixed up before he died. Every step echoed against the cobblestones. The sound reminded her of another night long ago, when Caleb had taken his first steps across their kitchen floor. She clapped, cried, laughed all at once. "That's my boy," she'd said. And now, years later, silence was all that answered back. She opened the car door, sat inside, and let her hands rest on the steering wheel. The reflection of the hotel lights shimmered on the windshield like ghosts. Her cheek throbbed, but deeper than that was the hollow ache behind her ribs, the place where pride and heartbreak meet. She whispered to herself, "They think they took my home, but they only took my address." The tear slipped down her face. She wiped it quickly, almost annoyed at herself. Then her phone buzzed again, this time a call, not from Caleb but from Marcus Hale. The name flashed across the screen. Estate attorney. She hesitated, then answered. "Marcus." "Naomi," he said gently, "are you okay?" She laughed under her breath. "Not really. But I think I finally know what to do." "What happened?" She looked back at the hotel, where the lights glimmered behind frosted windows. "A lesson," she said. "One I should have taught years ago." Marcus was quiet for a beat. "Naomi, are you sure you're ready for this?" She smiled faintly. "Oh, I've been ready for a long time. I just forgot." She hung up and sat there a moment longer, letting the rain tap softly against the roof of the car. Then she started the engine and drove off, leaving the laughter, the champagne, and the betrayal behind. The camera would follow her headlights down the narrow street, the glow fading into the mist as a gentle piano melody begins to play. Not polished, not perfect, just a simple tune, played by someone who knows what loss sounds like. And as her car disappears into the night, her voice returns steady and low. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to remember what was truly yours." There was a time when Caleb used to call me every Sunday. No matter where he was, no matter how late, he'd say, "Mom, I just wanted to hear your voice." Funny how those calls stopped right after he got married. Now, if the phone rings, it's usually because something's wrong, or because someone needs something. I remember the last time I felt truly needed. He was 19 in college, broke like every other kid trying to make it on his own. The tuition bill came in and he called, voice shaking. Mom, I might have to drop out. I didn't even think twice. I took off my wedding ring, the one I'd worn every day since the day his father slipped it on my finger, and I sold it. It didn't matter that it was the last piece of him I had left. Caleb's future felt more important. He never found out what I did. I didn't want him to. That was my gift, a quiet one. After that, years passed like slow rain. Then came Vanessa. She walked into his life like a firework. Loud, beautiful, demanding attention. I wanted to like her. God knows I tried. But every conversation felt like an interview I was failing. She'd glance around my old living room, the one with the mismatched furniture and faded curtains, and her smile would tighten. You really kept all this old stuff? She'd ask like nostalgia was a disease. She'd talk about rebranding their image. She used words like aesthetic and minimalism, words that didn't sound like home to me. And every time she said we, it felt like my son disappeared a little more. First, I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up, lives get busy, priorities shift. But the silence between us started to feel like a wall. I called just to check in, maybe share something small, like the rose bush that finally bloomed again, or the pie recipe he used to love. Most times I'd get his voicemail. When he did answer, it was always quick. We're busy, Mom. Can I call you later? He never did. Once I called while she was filming one of her influencer videos. I didn't know, of course. She answered with that practiced smile in her voice, saying, Hey Mom, we're in the middle of something. Please stop calling during work hours, okay? Work hours. Like a mother should schedule her love between deadlines and sponsorships. The house got quiet after that. Too quiet. I'd find myself setting 2 plates at the table, then putting one back. The old piano sat untouched, its keys gathering dust. Some nights I'd sit there with a cup of tea, staring at my phone on the counter, willing it to light up. It rarely did. The loneliness wasn't loud, it was patient. It moved in slowly, settling in the empty chairs, the half-finished crossword puzzles, the echoes that used to be laughter. I'd look at the front door sometimes, half expecting Caleb to walk in like he used to, saying, Mom, what's for dinner? But the only footsteps that came were my own. People think anger burns hot, but real pain is quiet. Seeps in. It waits. I wasn't angry that they forgot me. I was angry they remember me only when they needed something. Last Thanksgiving, Caleb called out of the blue. My heart jumped when I saw his name on the screen. I thought maybe he missed me. Maybe this is the moment he realizes he wants to come home. I answered, already smiling. Hey Mom, he said, too casually. Listen, Vanessa and I are trying to close on the house, but the loan officer said it'd be easier if you could co-sign. Just a formality. A formality. That word hung in the air like smoke. I told him I'd think about it. He said, thanks Mom. Love you, before hanging up. I didn't say it back. Not because I didn't love him, but because I was scared my voice might crack if I tried. After that, I stopped calling. Stopped waiting. I started walking every morning by the water where the sun hits the waves just right, and for a moment everything feels still. I'd pick up seashells and imagine the ocean once held them, then let them go. Maybe that's what being a mother is, holding on long enough to let go gracefully. Sometimes I'd see families out there. Young parents chasing toddlers, old couples holding hands. And I'd wonder, at what point does love turn into an obligation? When does care become inconvenience? One night I opened the box where I keep all of Caleb's childhood things. His baby shoes, old drawings, report cards with gold stars. The paper had yellowed, the ink fading. But I could still hear the laughter of a little boy running through that same hallway. The one who used to hug me so tight I couldn't breathe. Somewhere between then and now, that little boy became a man who couldn't look me in the eye. I put everything back carefully, closed the lid and whispered, you're still mine even if you forget. Then I went to the kitchen and made myself dinner. Just one plate this time. The same routine, same seat by the window. Outside, the world went on. Cars passing, lights flickering across the street, someone laughing in the distance. I smiled at that sound. It reminded me life still had warmth left in it, even if it wasn't here. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to stop being invisible. So I started writing small notes to myself on sticky paper, leaving them around the house. Remember to smile. Buy flowers. Breathe. It sounds silly, but it helped. Some days, healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about making peace with the cracks. I began teaching piano again, just for neighborhood kids. Their tiny hands, clumsy but eager, filled the air with mistakes that somehow sounded beautiful. I realized that maybe love doesn't disappear, it just changes address. And maybe that's okay. Still, at night, when I lock the door and turn off the lights, there's a shadow that lingers. A quiet thought that whispers, what if they only come back when they want something else? It's a fear I can't quite silence, but I've learned to live beside it. Because even when the world forgets you, there's a small stubborn part of the heart that keeps hoping to be remembered. Not for what you can give, but simply for who you are. And maybe, just maybe, one day that will be enough. The law office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. It hadn't changed much since the last time Naomi was here. Maybe 10 years ago, back when her husband was still alive and laughter still lived in the corners of their days. The man sitting behind the desk looked up from his files, his gray hair catching the afternoon light. Naomi Sterling, he said with a slow smile. Well, I'll be damned. It's been too long. Too long, she echoed, setting her purse down on the chair beside her. You still drink coffee strong enough to wake the dead? Marcus Hale chuckled. Guilty as charged. What brings you here? And don't tell me it's just for nostalgia. Naomi hesitated, glancing at the framed photos behind him. His kids, his law degree, a younger version of him standing beside her late husband, David. The memory stung like a bruise that never healed. I think David would have wanted me to come to you, she said finally. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That sounds serious. She nodded. It is. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the ceiling fan. Naomi folded her hands together, fingers trembling slightly. Then she began. Caleb and Vanessa. They've been trying to take my house, she said quietly. They told me it's already theirs. Papers signed, all done. I didn't even know they'd been planning it. Marcus frowned. That's illegal, Naomi. You're still the owner. No one can take your property without your consent. That's what I thought too, she said, her voice slow. But I've seen the way Vanessa moves, she's clever. And Caleb? He's not the boy I raised anymore. He's lost in her world, and I think he's willing to do whatever she says. Marcus sighed and rubbed his temples. You should have come to me sooner. We can contest any false claim, maybe even press charges if... Naomi interrupted him softly. Marcus. There's something else. He looked up. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, the paper yellowed and slightly torn at the edges. David gave me this before he died. Told me to open it when I felt cornered. Marcus took the envelope, opened it carefully, and read the handwritten note inside. The handwriting was neat, familiar. His old friend's words brought a lump to his throat. The safest place for truth is in silence. Marcus looked up. He always had a way with words. Naomi nodded, her eyes glassy but steady. He believed the less people knew, the safer our lives would be. After he passed, I followed that philosophy maybe too well. I lived quietly, worked part-time, drove the same old car. Everyone thought I was barely getting by. Even Caleb. Marcus leaned forward. Go on. She took a deep breath. Years ago, before David got sick, we made a small investment. Nothing dramatic, just a few $1,000s into a little record label one of his students started. He loved music, believed in the kid's vision. I didn't think much of it at the time. Marcus smiled faintly. You were always the practical one. Maybe not as practical as I thought, she said. That label grew. The kids sold it. Twice. And now? That small investment? She slid another envelope across the table. Bank statements, signed letters, ownership documents. It's worth a little over $3 million. Marcus blinked. $3 million? She nodded. In an account under my name. The only person who ever knew was David. I've never touched it, Marcus. Not once. But now, maybe it's time. He exhaled, whistling softly. Naomi, that changes everything. You're not just protecting your house. You're protecting an estate. If they try anything, we can file a restraining injunction, put a legal freeze on. No, she said gently, shaking her head. He stopped mid-sentence. No. Naomi looked at him, calm and deliberate. I don't want to hide behind lawyers yet. Not until I know their true intentions. I need to see how far they'll go. How deep their greed runs. Marcus frowned. You're walking a fine line. Once people smell money, they lose all reason. She smiled softly. They already have. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he leaned back, studying her like a man trying to reconcile the quiet woman in front of him with the steel. He now heard in her voice. You always did surprise me, he murmured. David used to say you were the calm before the storm. Naomi's eyes softened. He also used to say a storm clears what doesn't belong. Marcus chuckled. I remember that. He said it after the hurricane in '98 when we rebuilt that studio. She smiled. He said it when we lost everything and I thought our lives were over. Turns out it was just the beginning. Marcus tapped the file on his desk. So what do you want from me now? Just to hold on to this, she said, pushing the documents toward him. If anything happens to me, you know what to do. He hesitated. Naomi, this is serious money. Are you sure you don't want to use it to fight them legally? She shook her head. Not yet. I'll let the truth do it first. He stared at her, then smiled with a mix of admiration and concern. You sound just like David. Good, she said softly. He was the only person who ever believed silence could be power. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. You know, Naomi, I can draw up a contingency plan, one that guarantees your assets can't be touched, even if they try something stupid. But if you're planning to reveal all this, you might want to prepare for the fallout. I'm prepared, she said. They think I'm weak. That makes it easier. For the first time, she stood a little taller. Her posture changed, no longer the quiet, fragile mother who'd been slapped at a party, but someone reclaiming the parts of herself she'd hidden for too long. Marcus nodded slowly. Then let me at least be your backup. Things get messy, call me. I'll make sure the law speaks louder than their lies. Naomi smiled, eyes warm but resolute. I appreciate that. But first, Marcus, I want them to hear the truth straight from me. Not from a lawyer. Not from a judge. From the woman they thought was powerless. He studied her for a moment, then stood and extended his hand. Then I'll wait for your call. And hope I'm there to see their faces when you do. She took his hand, firm and steady. Oh, you'll see it, she said with quiet conviction. Everyone will. As Naomi walked out of the office, the late sunlight spilled across her shoulders. She paused for a moment, running her fingers over the wedding ring she no longer wore. Somewhere in the silence she heard David's voice again. Calm, steady, certain. The safest place for truth is in silence. She smiled to herself. Until it's time to speak. And with that she stepped into the light. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The kind that usually smelled like fresh coffee, and the ocean breeze sneaking in through the kitchen window. Naomi had just finished watering her plants when the doorbell rang. 3 sharp chimes. Not impatient but purposeful. Through the glass she could already see Vanessa standing there, dressed like she was heading to a business meeting. Hair perfect, folder in hand. Behind her were her parents and a few steps back, Caleb. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from one foot to the other, avoiding her gaze. Naomi wiped her hands on her apron, trying to quiet the knot tightening in her stomach. Well, she murmured, this can't be good. When she opened the door, Vanessa smiled that polished, camera-ready smile. Naomi, I hope we're not catching you at a bad time. You are, Naomi said, stepping aside anyway. But come in. Vanessa's parents entered first, offering those polite half-smiles people wear when they're about to do something impolite. Caleb followed last, eyes glued to the floor. He didn't even say hello. They all settled around the dining table. The same table where Naomi used to serve Caleb pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Vanessa set her folder down, clicking it open with a sound that cut through the silence. We just want to talk about your future, Vanessa began. Naomi tilted her head. My future seems to be the topic of everyone's concern these days. Vanessa ignored the comment, sliding a stack of papers across the table. This is a transfer agreement. Basically, it says that due to health and mobility concerns, you're voluntarily transferring ownership of the house to Caleb and me. That way you can focus on rest and health and mobility concerns? Naomi repeated. Did my doctor tell you something I don't know? Vanessa's smile never wavered. Naomi, it's just a precaution. You've had a few dizzy spells lately, haven't you? We're only trying to make sure things are handled before anything unexpected happens. Naomi's hands tightened around the edge of the table. You mean before I die? The older woman sitting beside Vanessa, her mother, cleared her throat awkwardly. Sweetheart, this is really just the practical thing to do. You don't want all the legal mess later. Naomi turned her gaze to Caleb. You agree with this? He flinched but didn't answer. Caleb. Her voice was calm but sharp enough to make him look up. He swallowed hard. Just easier this way, Mom. Vanessa and I can manage the upkeep, taxes, insurance. You don't need that stress anymore. Naomi stared at him for a long moment. You think I can't handle stress? I raised you through a recession, Caleb. I paid the mortgage when your father got sick. I worked nights at the library so you could go to college. But sure, tell me about stress. Vanessa leaned forward, voice still sugary sweet but with steel underneath. Naomi, we're not your enemies. We're trying to help you transition. You've done enough. It's time to let go. Naomi exhaled slowly, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. You think old means weak? Vanessa's eyes glinted. No, she said, her tone clipped. It means outdated. The word landed like a slap. Outdated. Like a piece of furniture that didn't fit the new decor. Naomi smiled faintly. Not because it was funny, but because the cruelty was so cleanly delivered it almost felt rehearsed. She reached for the papers and glanced at the top page. Her name printed neatly beside legal jargon and small font lies. The space for her signature waiting like a trap. She set it down carefully. I'll need to read it over, she said evenly. Vanessa nodded, gathering her things. Of course. But please don't take too long. The bank's already expecting the transfer. It's all lined up. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You already went to the bank? Vanessa blinked, realizing she'd said too much. Well, yes. Just preliminary discussions. Naomi smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. When they left, Naomi stood at the window watching them walk down the path. Vanessa talking animatedly. Caleb a silent shadow behind her. His shoulders were slumped, not with guilt but with surrender. He'd chosen the path of least resistance, even if it meant betraying the woman who'd given him everything. As their car disappeared, the house grew still again. The kind of stillness that feels heavy, almost alive. Naomi sat at the table, staring at the unsigned papers. For a moment she let herself feel it. The ache, the disbelief, the quiet sting of realizing your own blood could look at you and see only property. Then she stood up. She walked to the old hallway cabinet, the one David had built decades ago. It creaked when she opened it, the familiar sound like the house sighing in relief. She reached into the back and pulled out a thick brown envelope, its edges worn but carefully labeled in David's handwriting. Property deed confidential. She laid it on the table beside Vanessa's forged documents. The contrast was almost poetic, truth beside deception. She opened it slowly, scanning the notarized lines she'd seen before but never really appreciated until now. There it was in black and white. The property shall remain non-transferable during the lifetime of Naomi Sterling, unless deemed legally incapacitated by medical authority. Her lips curled into a small tired smile. Still of sound mind, she murmured. David had been many things, quiet, steady, sometimes too cautious, but he'd never been careless. He'd built this house not just with wood and nails but with foresight, with love that stretched beyond the grave. Naomi sat down again, her hand resting on the old contract. The paper felt like a heartbeat under her fingers, steady, alive, real. She whispered to the empty room, "You thought you were saving me, David. Turns out you're saving me again." For a long moment, she just sat there, letting the afternoon sun drift across the table. Dust motes floated in the light, slow and golden. Then she folded the real contract, slid it into her purse, and tucked Vanessa's fake one into a drawer. Not to forget it, but to keep it close. Evidence. Proof of what people will do when they think you have nothing left to lose. She walked to the window, looking out at the garden she and David had planted years ago. The roses were blooming again. Stubborn things surviving storms and neglect. She smiled softly. They think they've already won, she said to herself. Let them. Her reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but not outdated. Just waiting. And for the first time in a long while, Naomi felt something new stirring inside her. Not anger. Not sorrow. Resolve. Because when love is betrayed, silence stops being peace and starts becoming strategy. The next afternoon, Naomi called and told them she was ready to sign. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm that hides thunder. Vanessa sounded triumphant over the phone, chirping about how this will really simplify everything. They agreed to meet at the house that evening. By the time the knock came, Naomi had already set the stage. The papers were neatly arranged on the dining table, the pot of tea steaming between two cups. Hidden beneath the lace runner, inside a small drawer just below the tabletop, her old digital recorder blinked quietly. She'd tested it twice. One press and it would catch every word. When she opened the door, Vanessa breezed in first, perfectly put together as always. Caleb followed behind her, looking like a man walking into his own guilt. Naomi smiled gently. Come in. Let's get this over with. Vanessa didn't waste a second. Oh, thank you, Naomi, she said, flipping through the pages like a realtor sealing a deal. I promise this is the best decision for everyone. Naomi poured the tea slow and steady. I'm sure it is, she murmured. They sat down. Vanessa laid the contract flat in front of her, tapping the signature line with a manicured nail. Right here, she said brightly. Just sign and all the logistics will be handled by our attorney. You won't have to worry about a single thing. Naomi's pen hovered above the page. Her hand trembled, but not from weakness. From restraint. You know, I didn't sleep much last night, she said softly. I kept thinking about how strange it is. Giving up the house your husband built with his own hands. Vanessa smiled politely, missing the weight of the words. It's still in the family, Naomi. Nothing's really changing. Naomi looked at her. Nothing. Vanessa shrugged. Well, of course there'll be some updates. We're planning to sell the place in a few months. It's just too big for us. We'll get something more modern, something with better light for content creation. You know how it is. The words hit like a slap, but Naomi's face didn't flinch. She just nodded. And me? Vanessa blinked. What about you? What happens to me after you sell it? Vanessa gave a small dismissive laugh. Don't be dramatic. We've already looked into some really nice care homes nearby. You'll have your own room, full staff, community activities. It'll be perfect. Across the table, Caleb's shoulders stiffened. He finally looked up. Vanessa, he started. his voice barely above a whisper. She won't survive that. You know she won't. Vanessa turned to him, annoyed. What's that supposed to mean? She's not like your parents, he said quietly. This house is everything to her. She's lived here since before I was born. Vanessa's smile faded. And? That's not our problem, Caleb. We can't build our lives around guilt. It's just a house. It's not just a house, he said louder now. It's my home. She rolled her eyes. Correction, it was your home. You outgrew it a long time ago. We both did. The silence that followed was sharp. Naomi watched them, her heart breaking in slow motion. She'd imagined many kinds of betrayal in her life, but never this one. Never from her own child sitting right there, too afraid to fight for her. She let the silence stretch before she spoke. Her tone was almost gentle. You know, she said, when Caleb was little, he used to build forts in this living room. Blankets, pillows, books, whatever he could find. He'd spend hours pretending this house could keep out monsters. Vanessa gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. That's cute. Naomi's eyes softened. Yes, it was. Then her voice lowered. But the monsters always find their way in, don't they? Vanessa shifted in her seat. Naomi, please, can we stay on topic? Naomi nodded slowly. Of course. She placed her pen down. So, if I sign this, what happens to all my things? Oh, Vanessa said, waving a hand. Don't worry about that. We'll help pack everything up. Whatever you want to keep, we'll move to the care home. The rest? We'll sell or donate. Naomi smiled, a soft, almost sorrowful smile. You've thought of everything. Vanessa's grin returned. That's what I do. Naomi reached for the pen again, fingers brushing the paper. Then she stopped. Her hand froze midair. Vanessa frowned. Is something wrong? Naomi looked up, meeting her gaze. Yes, she said quietly. Everything. She pushed the papers back across the table. The movement startled them both. I can't sign this, she said, her voice calm, unshakable. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me? Naomi leaned forward slightly. You walk into my home, the one your husband grew up in, and talk about selling it like it's a used car. You call me outdated, call my life inconvenient. And now you expect me to sign it away because you decided my health is a liability? Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Naomi stood up. Her hands were steady now. You were right about one thing, Vanessa. I am old. But I'm not weak. She turned to her son. And you, Caleb. Her voice softened, and for a brief moment pain cracked through her calm. You were my only son. Everything I ever did was for you. Every night shift, every sacrifice, every meal I skipped. All so you could have a better life. Caleb looked down, ashamed, his throat tight. Naomi's voice trembled, not from fear but from truth. But I don't recognize you anymore. You're not my son. You're just someone's echo. The words landed like thunder. Caleb looked up, eyes wide, but Naomi had already turned away. Vanessa stood abruptly. You'll regret this, she hissed. We'll find another way. You can't stop us. Naomi met her gaze, unflinching. We'll see. Vanessa stormed out, heels clicking against the tile like gunshots. Caleb followed behind, but not before pausing at the door. Mom, he began, his voice small. Naomi didn't look at him. Go, she said quietly. When the door closed, the silence that filled the room was deafening. Naomi walked to the table, lifted the tablecloth and reached under the drawer. The small recorder blinked red, still running. She pressed stop and the machine gave a soft click. A sound that felt like justice beginning. For a long moment she just stood there, holding it in her hand, staring at the front door. Then she smiled faintly and whispered to herself, the truth always sounds better when you let them say it out loud. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt heavier than usual, like it was holding its breath. Naomi sat at the dining table, staring at the small recorder in her hand. It was quiet now, no blinking red light, no sound. Just truth sealed inside a cheap plastic box. She replayed the last few minutes in her mind. Vanessa's voice sharp as glass, Caleb's silence cutting deeper than any words. She should have felt angry, but what she really felt was empty, tired. Like every disappointment of motherhood, had finally gathered in one room and sat down beside her. She reached for her phone and scrolled to Marcus's name. Her finger hovered for a second before pressing call. He answered on the first ring. Naomi, I was about to call you. How did it go? It went, she said softly. And I got it all. Marcus's tone shifted immediately. You mean recorded? Yes. Every word. Good. Don't delete it. Send it to me. Right now. I already did, she said, almost smiling. While we were talking. There was a pause, then Marcus's voice came back, firm and professional now. I'll take it from here. Naomi. This is enough to start a case. She closed her eyes. Then started. 2 hours later, the knock at the door wasn't from family this time. It was from 2 officers and a social worker. They were polite, careful with their words, but Naomi could see the surprise in their eyes when they looked at her. The quiet old woman from the neighborhood who'd suddenly become the center of a legal storm. We're here to verify a report, one officer said. You're Naomi Sterling? Yes. Do you mind if we come in? She stepped aside, motioning them in. Please. I've had worse company this week. They smiled politely, took their notes, asked their questions. When one of them asked if she had any proof, Naomi slid the recorder across the table without a word. The young officer pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the room. Once this is done, we'll sell the place. Mom can move into a care home. Then Caleb's voice shaky, she won't survive that. And finally Vanessa again, cold as winter. That's not our problem. The officers exchanged looks. One of them turned off the recorder, the click echoing like a verdict. That's enough, he said quietly. They thanked her, told her they'd follow up with the district attorney, and left. Naomi stood at the window, watching their car disappear down the street. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel empty. It felt like it had a pulse again, like it was fighting with her. By evening, the story had already started spreading online. She didn't have social media, but Marcus called to warn her anyway. Naomi, he said, you're trending. She laughed softly. That can't be good. He sighed. The local paper picked it up. Then someone leaked the report. Headline says, Influencer couple investigated for elder abuse. It's everywhere now, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. Good, she said. Let them hear what happens when you try to steal from silence. He chuckled under his breath. You sound calm. I am, she said. For the first time in years. That night, just as she was settling into bed, the phone rang again. She didn't need to look at the caller ID. The way her chest tightened told her it was Caleb. She let it ring twice before answering. Yes. His voice cracked on the other end. Mom, please. You have to stop this. She said nothing. They came to our apartment, he continued, desperation spilling out now. There were cops, reporters, it's a nightmare. Vanessa's losing sponsors. People are calling us monsters online. Naomi's voice was quiet. Maybe they just saw who you really are. He groaned. It's not that simple. You don't understand how this world works. One story like this can destroy us. She sat up slowly, her voice calm but steady. You destroyed yourself when you forgot what family means. Mom, I made a mistake, okay? Vanessa pushed me, I didn't know what to. You didn't know how to say no, she interrupted. You didn't know how to stand up for me. For yourself. He went silent. Naomi let the pause hang. You taught me silence, Caleb, she said finally. You taught me how to swallow pain and pretend it didn't hurt. But now, I'm teaching you consequence. Mom, please, he said again, his voice cracking. You can end this. Just tell Marcus to drop it. Please, for me. She sighed softly. For you? You mean the son who stood by while his wife humiliated his mother in front of strangers? Or the man who tried to take her home and her dignity in one afternoon? Mom, His voice was barely a whisper. "You'll survive this, Caleb," she said, her tone softening but never breaking. "Maybe you'll even learn from it. But I won't protect you from truth anymore. I've done that all my life, and look what it made you, someone who confuses love with ownership." He didn't answer. She could hear him breathing unsteady like a boy again. "I still love you," she said quietly. "But love isn't covering up your sins anymore. Love is letting you face them." There was a long pause, then a single broken "I'm sorry" before the line went dead. Naomi set the phone down on the nightstand, the faint hum of the dial tone filling the silence. She stared at the ceiling, letting the sound fade until there was nothing left. For a moment she almost cried, but the tears didn't come. Instead, a strange calm washed over her. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't shout or rage. It just arrived quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night. Outside, a police car rolled by, its headlights flashing briefly through her window. Naomi watched the light move across the walls, then disappear. She whispered to herself, "Let the law do what love couldn't." And for the first time, she turned off the lamp without fear of the dark. The courtroom smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face calm, almost serene. Across from her sat Caleb and Vanessa, both looking smaller than she remembered, though Vanessa still clung to her phone like it was armor. Caleb's shoulders were hunched, eyes glued to the floor. He hadn't looked at his mother once. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the chatter fell silent. Naomi didn't flinch. She'd spent her whole life being quiet. This was the first time silence felt like power. Marcus stood beside her, papers in hand, voice steady. "Your Honor, what we're presenting today is not just a dispute over property," he began. "It's a matter of deception, one that sought to strip a woman of her home, her dignity, and her rights." Vanessa's lawyer immediately objected, but Marcus didn't miss a beat. "The defense claims Naomi Sterling signed away her home willingly. We intend to prove she was coerced, and that the documents were falsified before they ever reached her hands." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Marcus pressed play on the recording. The room filled with Vanessa's voice, confident and cruel. "Once this is done, we'll sell the place. Mom can move into a care home." Then Caleb's voice followed, weak and trembling. "She won't survive that." Finally Vanessa again, colder this time. "That's not our problem." The words echoed off the marble walls. The silence that followed was deafening. Naomi sat still, eyes down, but inside she could feel something unclenching. Years of quiet swallowed pain beginning to lift. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Sterling, would you like to make a statement?" Naomi stood slowly, her voice soft but steady. "Yes, Your Honor." She turned toward the room, toward her son. "I never thought I'd see the day I'd have to defend myself from my own child," she began. "When Caleb was born, I promised I'd protect him from the world. I worked 2 jobs, missed meals, sold my wedding ring to pay his tuition. Every scrape, every heartbreak, I was there." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't waver. "And I did it happily. Because that's what mothers do. They give. Even when it costs them everything." She looked directly at Caleb. "I once gave him life. Today I'm giving him freedom. Freedom from his own greed." The room stayed silent, except for the faint clicking of Vanessa's pen. A nervous, futile rhythm. Naomi continued, her tone quiet but sharp enough to cut. "They say love is unconditional. But it's not. Love has limits. Love ends when it becomes abuse." Vanessa's lawyer tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. "Let her speak." Naomi nodded in gratitude. "I'm not here to punish my son. I'm here to show him that truth doesn't go away just because you bury it under money or shame. It waits. And one day it stands up in a courtroom and speaks for itself." When she sat down, Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That was perfect," he whispered. The defense tried to recover, arguing Naomi misunderstood the documents, that Vanessa had only acted out of concern. But then Marcus laid the evidence out one by one. The forged signature, the falsified notary seal, the email trail between Vanessa and her parents discussing how to make Naomi sign fast. Each piece fell into place like stones in a grave. By the time he finished, Vanessa's confident mask was cracking. Her voice trembled as she whispered to her attorney, who shook his head slowly. Caleb looked pale, lost. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of finality. This court finds the property transfer invalid and rules in favor of Mrs. Sterling. Furthermore, the court charges Vanessa Rhodes with document falsification and attempted financial exploitation of an elder. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Vanessa gasped, face draining of color. Caleb put a hand on her arm, but she jerked it away, muttering something under her breath. Naomi didn't smile. Justice wasn't supposed to feel triumphant. It was heavy, like closing a door you once prayed would stay open. As the bailiff escorted Vanessa out, Naomi turned her gaze toward her son. For a long moment neither spoke. Caleb's eyes filled with tears he couldn't hide anymore. He mouthed a single word, "Mom." Naomi stood, gathered her bag and walked past him. She paused just long enough to rest her hand briefly on his shoulder. Not as forgiveness, not as farewell, but as acknowledgement. "You'll learn," she whispered. "Maybe not today, but one day." Caleb lowered his head, shoulders shaking, unable to meet her eyes. As Naomi walked out of the courtroom, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, washing over her like a quiet benediction. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Sterling, how does it feel to win?" She stopped for a second, looked at them and said simply, "It doesn't feel like winning. Feels like surviving." Then she walked on, slow, graceful, steady. Inside, Marcus watched her go and smiled to himself. "You did it," he murmured. "You really did it." And somewhere behind him, Caleb finally looked up. Eyes red, hands trembling, and realized what it meant to lose something that money could never buy back. For Naomi, the sound of the courthouse doors closing behind her was the sweetest silence she'd ever heard. The house felt different when Naomi came home. Lighter somehow, though nothing had really changed. The same framed pictures hung crooked on the walls. The same ticking clock filled the silence. The same creaky floorboard groaned under her step. But the air, it felt clean again. Like the house had finally exhaled. She slipped off her shoes by the door and went straight to the backyard. The roses were still blooming, soft pink and wild, reaching for the light just like they always had. She grabbed the old watering can, filled it halfway, and began her usual rounds. The sound of water hitting soil was almost music. For the first time in months, she didn't have to rush, didn't have to brace herself for anyone's knock, anyone's demand, anyone's voice telling her she was too old, too slow, too much. It was just her in the garden. She whispered to the flowers like she used to. "You made it through the storm," she said softly, brushing one of the petals. "Guess we both did." Inside, on the kitchen table, her journal waited. The same one she'd been keeping since David passed away. Its pages were uneven, filled with small handwriting, bits of grief, gratitude, anger, love. She sat down, pen in hand, and began to write. "Justice gave me peace, not joy," she wrote. "Peace is quiet. Joy is noisy. Maybe I'm not ready for noisy yet." She paused, tapping the pen against the page. The truth was, winning hadn't made her happy. It hadn't filled the empty seat at her table or erased the sound of her son's voice breaking over the phone. It hadn't turned back time or mended anything that truly mattered. But it had given her something else, stillness. The kind that lets you breathe again without guilt. The doorbell rang, snapping her out of thought. For a moment her chest tightened. Old habits die hard. But when she peeked through the window and saw Marcus standing there, holding a brown folder and a cup of coffee, she smiled. He waved. "I come bearing caffeine and good news," he said as she opened the door. "Marcus," she said, letting him in, "you didn't have to come all the way here." He shrugged. Didn't trust you not to hide behind your garden forever. She laughed. A small rusty sound that felt good coming out. Guilty as charged. He set the coffee down and handed her the folder. The foundation we talked about? It's real now. We got the paperwork approved this morning. The city's backing it. We're calling it the Sterling Project. A legal support program for seniors who've been taken advantage of. Naomi blinked, touched but overwhelmed. You named it after me? After what you did, he corrected. You didn't just win a case, Naomi. You started a conversation. People are writing in from all over saying your story gave them courage to speak up. She looked down at the folder. Her name printed neatly across the top. Her fingers brushed the letters like they might fade if she touched them too hard. You really think I can help? Marcus smiled. I know you can. You've already done it. Naomi exhaled slowly, eyes glistening. I don't know, Marcus. I'm tired. I spent my whole life giving to my husband, to my son, to this house. I'm not sure I have much left to give. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Maybe this time you give to yourself. Helping people like you isn't charity, Naomi. It's healing. She sat back down at the table, her hand resting over her journal. Healing, she repeated like she was testing the word on her tongue. He nodded. You've carried a lot of pain, but you didn't let it turn you bitter. That's rare. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, painting soft gold across the room. It looked like peace, quiet, ordinary peace. Naomi finally smiled. You know, David used to say forgiveness isn't about setting someone else free. It's about unlocking your own cage. Marcus tilted his head. And do you think you're ready to unlock it? She looked out the window at her garden. The roses swaying gently in the wind, alive and defiant. Maybe, she said. Helping others. That's how I forgive myself. For staying silent so long. For loving the wrong way. Marcus nodded, his expression warm. Then it sounds like you're already halfway there. They sat quietly for a moment, sipping coffee, the kind of silence that feels safe. The world outside went on, cars passing, kids laughing down the street. Life unfolding as if the last storm had never happened. When Marcus stood to leave, Naomi walked him to the door. Thank you, she said, for standing by me when everyone else turned away. He smiled. You didn't need me, Naomi. You just needed reminding who you were. After he left, she lingered at the doorway for a while, watching the light fade. Then she went back to her journal and wrote a single line. Maybe peace isn't the absence of pain. Maybe it's learning how to live beside it. She closed the book gently, turned off the lamp and stepped outside. The evening air was cool against her skin. The street was quiet, except for the distant hum of crickets. Naomi picked a single rose, held it close and whispered to herself, we're still here. And for the first time in a long time she didn't feel alone. The story broke on a Thursday morning. Naomi didn't even know it at first. She was out back trimming the rose bushes when her neighbor, Ellen, ran over waving her phone like it was on fire. Naomi, you're on the news. Naomi blinked. The what? Ellen turned the screen around. There it was. A headline in bold letters. The Silent Fighter. Elderly woman wins case against influencer couple. Below it, a picture of Naomi outside the courthouse. Sunlight spilling over her shoulders like she planned it that way. She almost laughed. The Silent Fighter, she said under her breath. Guess that's better than angry old woman. By noon, reporters were calling the house. Emails pouring in from networks she'd never heard of. People wanted her story, her advice, her opinion. Some just wanted to say thank you. The talk show host left a voicemail calling her a symbol of grace under fire. Naomi didn't feel like a symbol. She still felt like a woman who watered her plants every morning and talked to ghosts in the kitchen. But she watched the coverage once, sitting on the couch with her tea. And for the first time she didn't turn the volume down. Clips played of her walking out of court, of Marcus beside her, of Vanessa being escorted past flashing cameras. The reporter's voice said, "Millions have viewed Naomi Sterling's story, calling her courage a wake-up call for families everywhere." Naomi shook her head softly. "Courage," she murmured. "That's just what happens when you run out of options." Across town, Caleb sat in a dark living room, staring at the same broadcast. The curtains were closed, the phone silenced. Vanessa was gone, staying with her parents while her lawyers tried to repair what was left of her reputation. He sat there, remote in hand, watching his mother's name scroll across the screen. When they called her the silent fighter, something in him cracked. The anchor said, "Naomi Sterling has become an online symbol of dignity and quiet strength, inspiring thousands to stand up against elder exploitation." He couldn't look away. On the screen they showed an old photo of Naomi years ago, younger, smiling, holding him as a child. The same smile that had been missing from his life for too long. His throat tightened. He turned off the TV, but her face stayed in his head. Every word she'd said in court echoed now. "I once gave him life. Today, I'm giving him freedom from his own greed." He rubbed his eyes, but the tears came anyway. For the first time he understood what she'd meant. It wasn't anger. It was truth. And he'd been too blind to see it. By evening he found himself in the car, driving without really deciding where to go. His hands turned the wheel on their own. When he looked up again, he was parked in front of her house. The porch light was on. Through the window he could see her, sitting at the table, writing in her journal. The same calm presence she'd always been. The same woman who'd once waited up for him when he stayed out too late. The same mother he'd traded for convenience. He got out of the car, walked slowly up the path. Every step felt heavier than the last. The sound of crickets filled the quiet. He stopped at the door, lifted his hand, ready to knock, and froze. What would he even say? "I'm sorry?" It wasn't enough. "I didn't mean to?" That was a lie. He had meant to every time he stayed silent. He lowered his hand and just stood there, staring through the glass at the woman who had given him everything. She looked peaceful now, writing, occasionally smiling to herself. The single lamp lit the room, and for a moment, it looked like she was surrounded by warmth, the kind that no apology could earn back. He pressed his palm gently against the door just once. Then he turned and walked back to his car. Inside the house, Naomi looked up. She thought she heard something. Maybe footsteps on the porch, maybe just the wind. She walked to the window and peered outside. But there was nothing there. Only the glow of the streetlight and the faint hum of a car engine fading into the distance. She stood there a while, then smiled softly to herself. "Maybe someday," she whispered. Later that night she opened her email. Hundreds of messages filled her inbox. Strangers from all over the country sharing their own stories. Daughters fighting for their mothers, widows protecting their homes, sons asking how to make things right. She read every one. Some made her cry. Some made her laugh. All of them reminded her of one thing. Silence breaks differently for everyone. Naomi wrote a short reply to one message. A young woman named Lily who said her brother had tried to take their mother's house. Naomi typed, "Don't let bitterness be louder than truth. You don't need to shout to be heard." Then she hit send. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. For the first time she felt like her voice, the one she'd spent years burying, had finally found its place in the world. Somewhere out there, people were watching her story and realizing it wasn't just hers. It belonged to every quiet soul who'd ever been pushed aside, told they didn't matter, told to stay silent. Naomi smiled and whispered, "If they're listening now, maybe that's enough." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of roses through the night. 2 years passed like pages turning in a book she'd already read, slow, quiet, but full of meaning. Naomi's house stood exactly the same. White shutters, a rose garden that never gave up, and that familiar creak on the front porch that greeted her every morning. But her life had changed entirely. The world still remembered her story. Reporters eventually moved on, but the people didn't. Letters kept coming, handwritten, typed, even painted, from strangers who saw themselves in her silence. Some told her how they'd stood up to their families. Others said they wished they had. And so, one morning Naomi did something she never imagined she would do again. She started over. The Silver Teas Foundation began in her dining room, with just her, Marcus, and a stack of notes scribbled on the back of grocery receipts. Its mission was simple but powerful: to help older adults protect their homes, their savings, and their voices. Every tea has a story, she said during the first meeting. Ours is about making sure no one gets locked out of their own life. Now, 2 years later, that little idea had grown into something much bigger. Naomi stood on a small stage in a community hall in Charleston, the same hall where she used to attend piano recitals decades ago. Only this time she wasn't playing, she was speaking. Before her stood rows of men and women, many of them with silver hair and kind, weathered faces. Some had lost everything and were rebuilding. Others were just beginning to fight back. On the table beside her sat a small wooden box filled with keys, old, worn, each one tied to a story. Naomi picked up the microphone, smiling gently. When I was your age, she began, I thought the hardest thing about growing old was losing people. Turns out the hardest part is realizing some people will try to take advantage of the kindness that never left you. Soft laughter rippled through the room. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. She reached into the box and pulled out the first key, handing it to a woman in the front row. This one belongs to Mrs. Hanley, she said. She almost lost her apartment to her own nephew. But she didn't sign. She said, if I can still cook, I can still choose. That's strength. Another key, to a man named George, who'd been tricked into giving up his farm until the foundation helped him win it back. He told me something I'll never forget, Naomi continued. He said, they thought I was just old. I was just patient. The crowd smiled, some with tears in their eyes. Naomi looked around the room, her voice softening. When I started this, I thought I was trying to protect people. But what I really wanted was to give back the feeling that someone is still on their side. She reached into the box one last time, holding up a small brass key, the one that had once been hers. The one that had survived every betrayal, every court date, every sleepless night. This, she said, her eyes glinting with emotion, isn't about ownership. It's about belonging. A home is not walls and roofs. It's the peace you refused to sell. The room fell silent. A few people wiped their eyes. Someone in the back started clapping, and soon the whole hall joined in. It wasn't loud or flashy, just warm, the kind of applause that feels like a thank you rather than praise. After the ceremony, Marcus found her by the side door, leaning against the wall with a cup of coffee. You know, he said David would be proud. Naomi smiled. I like to think he's been watching the whole time, probably complaining that I still watered the roses too much. He laughed. You've done more good in 2 years than most people do in a lifetime. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that once trembled over a false contract. Maybe, she said. But all I really did was stop being quiet. That evening the house was bathed in the kind of light she loved, golden, soft, forgiving. Naomi sat by the piano, the same one she hadn't touched since David passed. Dust floated in the glow as she pressed a key. It was out of tune, but somehow that made it sound even more human. Her fingers found an old melody, one she used to play when Caleb was little, the lullaby she thought she'd forgotten. The notes were slow, fragile, but alive. As she played, she glanced toward the mantel where a photo of Caleb still stood. Not from the trial, not from the pain, but from before. He'd come by once, months after the headlines faded. He didn't say much. Just stood in the doorway, eyes red, holding a letter. They hadn't talked about the past, not yet. But she'd hugged him anyway. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need an explanation. It just needs time. Now, sitting at the piano, she whispered, we're getting there, son. The camera would slowly pull back, sunlight through the curtains, the sound of her music spilling softly into the quiet evening. Her voice, calm and steady, would close the story.